Kia ora koutou. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're listening to us. I'm really delighted to have with me now Josh Taylor. So Josh is the founder, along with his partner Nicola, of Tax Traders, which is one of New Zealand's leading tax pooling intermediaries. And I'm really pleased that Josh has got time available to chat to me now. We've had a tax reform package which came through last week, and that does have some implications for tax pooling, and Josh will talk us through that. But before we do that, Josh, just go straight to you in terms of welcome, but also ask you, what have the last few days looked like, or the last week looked like for you and your team at Tax Traders?
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Peter. Look, obviously, same for us, same as everyone. It's been just an evolving sort of drama. I mean, I don't think a week ago any of us could have anticipated being where we are now, but here we are. I mean, the great thing is we've been pretty well set up to work remotely. So we actually started doing that on Monday. We only had about a third of the team in, and so it hasn't been too hard of a transition, but certainly really interesting for us to end up where we are now. But you know, we already started last week actually thinking about, on the back of the stimulus coming out, adding what we call Fee Guard, which is our peace of mind policy around finance arrangements in place, and sort of with a view to thinking we don't know where this is going to end, but we can talk a bit about more about that later on.
Great. No, thanks, Josh. I think you're absolutely right. We're all in the same boat, and it's all happened very, very quickly. So it's all about being agile and seeing things as opportunities and rather than necessarily as challenges. Just thinking back last week to the government's first support package, yes. That included a raft of tax reforms, which I've talked through with John Cuthbertson, the CAANZ tax leader, and he's talked about that in some detail. But one of the main ones was in respect of provisional tax, and of course we may see further provisional tax changes as the government keeps responding and being agile. But just talk us through that first change to Prov tax and how tax pooling fits in with that.
Yeah, sure. So we keep in touch with IRD on a pretty regular basis, and we had the opportunity to actually talk with them a bit about this last week, so we can sort of flesh that out in some more detail. There are two main measures around provisional tax. The first one being the lifting of the threshold from $2,500 to $5,000 to be in the Prov tax regime, and the numbers I've seen suggest that's going to take about 90,000 small taxpayers out of the provisional tax payment net. So that's a good thing. But the main one that's got people talking, obviously, is the potential to have use of money interest written off if you're late paying your tax. Now, they've said that's not limited to industry or region, but there are some criteria around it. So it's worth me just highlighting those criteria very quickly now. They've used a variety of different phrases have sort of appeared. One has been significant impact, adversely affected, severely constrained. Read that as a 30% drop in turnover in order to opt yourself into these measures. Now that 30% drop is measured as 30% drop over this month compared to the same month 12 months ago. Obviously, that's going to align pretty nicely if you're talking about GST or PAYE. What's less certain is around provisional tax, which is usually a 4-monthly payment. Are IRD going to measure that over a 4-month period in this year versus the similar 4-month period in the prior year? We don't quite know where that's going to land yet, and IRD have said they're going to need to wait till the legislation's actually passed before they can really firm up on some of these criteria. The other point to note is that it is dependent on you not being able to pay. And the examples that were given in the communication last week were that the person's made application to their bank and been declined. Obviously, you could apply to a tax pool as well. That would be another option available to you. But what's unclear in that example of being declined by the bank is that you just gave your bank manager a call and said, hey, what are my chances? And they said, not great. Or do you have to go through the full application process? Again, we're going to have to wait for guidance from IRD once that legislation comes out. But that's probably about a week and a half away. And, you know, we'll certainly be keeping our contacts informed on that.
Thanks, Josh. I think you touched on a few interesting aspects there. So I understand. So we're talking on the 24th of March. I'm conscious that our audience might be hearing this later in the week or even next week, and it looks
Yes.
like urgency, like this legislation, which includes the prov tax changes, will go through under urgency. Initially, I think urgency had been expected around next week, around April the 1st, but it may happen even more quickly. So it may be well done and dusted that the legislative changes are enacted this week. So
Yes.
I'm sure Josh will update your customers, your clients on your website as soon as that comes through, as will the IRD be telling people once that legislation is enacted. The other thing you touched on, Josh, was the need for, in terms of the use of money interest concession, which is always at the Commissioner's discretion, to have for the taxpayer to be significantly adversely affected, which is quite a mouthful, isn't it? Significantly adversely affected. And I think you're drawing a good connection there with the 30% you mentioned. I'm assuming that's because the wage subsidy eligibility, for example, is based on a 30% reduction in revenue for a period this year versus last year.
Yeah, that's right, and that's again in the communications to date. That's been the guidance that similar threshold's going to be applied across the range of stimulus options. But again, at the same time, in the conversations we had with IR last week, they said, look, wait till the actual legislation comes out before we can speak with authority about how it's exactly going to land. The other point that's worth noting is IRD when we were talking with them last week, they were clear that this is meant to be a targeted measure for those that can pay. They want those that can pay to pay. They're not looking for everyone to run for the hills and no one pay tax.
I can understand IRD's perspective on this and the government's perspective, because the government will be dishing out a lot of money to support businesses through this crisis. We've already got a package of 12 billion revamped yesterday with another 4 or 5 billion thrown in. So it's going to get much bigger and bigger. So those that can pay tax should continue to do so. So good message. Thanks, Josh, for the community as a whole. What sort of questions are your clients asking you right now?
Yeah, sure. Look, interestingly enough, first question we're getting a lot of is do you actually have tax available? Now, great news there is we always keep about 9 months supply on hand. We proactively manage and we spend a lot of time forecasting what the anticipated demand is. So we've always got tax on hand. So whether it's terminal tax for 19 year, the 2020 year, or looking at audits and reassessments, we've got tax available.
That's good to hear.
The other question we get a lot of, we're getting a few around now, is if you're making if we're putting plans in place to lock in some tax now but pay for it in the future, how do we know the money's going to be there, or will it be there? And for people that haven't done a lot of that in the past, it's worth reiterating to them that when they put an arrangement in place, we actually set that money aside with public trust, so it's on ice for them. So provided they pay for it at the maturity date, then everything will flow through, and that tax will appear in their IRD account. So that's a couple of the questions. The other main one we're getting a lot of now is just basically tell us about this stimulus package, and the sort of the urban myth now is that IRD is not charging use of money interest on anything, and everyone's getting a free one. Now, as we've just highlighted, there are some criteria around that. It is also only for payments that were due from 14th of February this year onwards. So it's not a case of free for all. And as we dig a bit deeper, I think it's worth thinking about that criteria of the 30% monthly drop. That aligns quite nicely for GST and PAYE, but it's less clear whether we're going to see any practical impact of that around provisional tax, because it could be measured over a longer period. Also, when you think about a 30% drop in turnover for a lot of businesses, not necessarily all businesses, but a lot of businesses, that's going to put them probably into loss territory. So you may well, in order to meet that criteria, you may well actually not be in a prov tax paying position, but certainly GST and PAYE it'll be relevant for.
Great. Look, great to know about the GST and PAYE aspect and the income tax. And you're absolutely right, Josh. So some businesses will be in losses, that this won't be relevant for them. But there will be SMEs out there, depending on sector and industry, obviously, who are continuing to make profits,
Yes.
hopefully lots of them. And just wanted to ask you about kind of threshold for your or whether there's any kind of de minimis for taxpayers to access tax pooling from you.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. No de minimis, no minimum limits from our point of view. We've been right from day one. We've been all about whether you're one of the big boys or whether you're one of the smaller players, you get the same offering. So you can contact us for as little as $1 of tax, right up to as much as you like. What I sort of probably should have said before is, because this is a discretion that you're going to have to apply for IRD, it's quite possible that you're going to need to make a decision on whether you actually pay the tax or not before you've heard from IRD whether they're going to grant you this remission on the use of money interest, and that can obviously be a tricky point for people, and that probably feeds back into the IRD's point that if you can pay it, they want you to pay it, but obviously cash flow is king, more than ever. So that's where our fee guard arrangement, which was sort of referred to as our peace of mind policy, comes in, and we've been getting a few questions about that. What that translates to is, if you've got an upcoming tax payment, say 7th of May, your provisional payment, you can pay the interest up front to lock that tax in now. But if it turns out that down the track you pay the interest to lock that in, give you 12 months to pay, at the end of 12 months, if it turns out that you didn't make as much profit as you thought and you don't need all of that tax, or you were actually successful in getting an interest waiver from IRD, so that with the benefit of hindsight, you wouldn't have actually financed as much tax, or you wouldn't have taken out as big a coverage position with tax traders, we'll give you your interest back on what you didn't need. So you've got that peace of mind that you can cover yourself now, but you're not going to be left out of pocket if you don't need it.
That's great to hear, Josh, and it's obviously appropriate to name the peace of mind policy, so good to know about that. Are there any other aspects of tax pooling? I'm conscious that our audience will be practitioners who are familiar with tax pooling, and many of them will be familiar with the service you provide, but are there other aspects that you want to talk about now?
Yeah, look, couple of quick ones, just to say there are a lot of options we can provide around payment flexibility, and even for 2019 terminal tax, we have got that 75-day window out till 75 days after terminal tax. So for a lot of people, that'll be middle of June. Be proactive. Give your clients a call. They might not always be coming forward to say we've got pressures around cash flow. Can be a great proactive conversation to have. And the final one to highlight is, if you have got clients that have made provisional payments for the 2020 year into a pool, there are options that all the pools can provide to them about releasing that money back into their business for 3, 4, 6 months, just while we've got some of these cash flow pressures over this uncertain period. So payments already in a pool can be, we can get that money back out and back into the businesses for a period of time if that's needed.
That's good advice, Josh, and I think it's broader than that too, isn't it? It's about being proactive in every aspect of your business now. You're absolutely essential, and asking for help is essential when you need it. I think we're not always the best people at asking for help, but yes. Now's the time. So ask for help, engage early, and be proactive. Really good messages generally for public practitioners. So Josh, look, thanks so much for your time. I know you're busy and you've got like all of us, getting used to the working from home and all of that, and having a team that's spread around and being connected with your team is still really important. So thank you for being with us.
No, absolute pleasure, Peter, and thanks for the work you guys are doing to keep the communication channels open for people and help spread that knowledge, spread the communication. We'll keep doing that as well, and any questions that people have on anything to do with tax or provisional tax particularly, don't hesitate to give us a call. We're here to help.
Great. Okay. And your website, Tax Traders?
Taxtraders.co.nz, 0800 829 872, and we've got Zoom, Teams, all that video functionality as well for people that want to connect that way as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Peter.